Irreverent, entertaining, cool. You're listening to LA Talk Radio.
You're listening to What Women Want with Judy Goss and Kristin West, only on LA Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to What Women Want Talk Radio. I am your host, Kristin West. Our beloved Judy Goss is traveling this evening, and so she won't be with us today, but she's going to be with us in our heart and our mind, and we know she'll catch this broadcast a little later. Thank you so much for joining us on our show tonight. We're going to be discussing tonight how not to quit your it, that thing that makes you passionate, that makes your heart beat, the reason you're here. And we're going to be talking about that with the always inspiring Jane Bishop tonight. And later in the show, we're also going to be discussing a very important topic as well, Sexual Assault Awareness Month, with Veronica Loving and Jazzmine Jackson. What Women Want Talk Radio has reached over 1 million downloads since we first hit the airwaves. And between latalkradio.com's archives, iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, we are all over on social media, and you can find us everywhere. So we're actively seeking out sponsors for our show for the next few months, and it's more affordable than you think. So email us for a complete deck through our website, whatwomenwantradio.com, after the show. So like I said at the top of the show, Judy is jet-setting somewhere very exciting today. And check her out online, her bio. I'll just go over the fine points here. Her background comes from high fashion modeling with Ford New York, and after that she was a magazine editor, and that led her to hosting and reporting regularly for Better TV, City Buzz, and all the networks across the country, both regional and national, and she's also a regular contributor on NBC and Fox. She founded the company What Women Want Networking 7 years ago, and that goes alongside our lovely show, and we're nationwide with several regional chapters. And we're hosting our second National Women's Conference in October 19th through 21st at the Hyatt Regency in Atlanta. And she's also a St. Martin's Press author and the mom of teenage twin girls. That is the lovely Judy. And of course, I'm always thrilled week after week to be hosting this show with her. And a little about me, I'm an actress, I'm a producer, I'm a TV and radio host. And this weekend, I'm going to be at the Silicon Beach Film Festival for the premiere of The Spirit Room. I've been talking about that for a few weeks. I acted in that film by Adam J. Ung. And so you can catch me in Manhattan Beach this weekend for the premiere of The Spirit Room. You can also catch my latest Horror Talk with Kristin West videos for Domain of Horror. They're on YouTube, also available on Podomatic and now iHeartRadio. And you know what? Sometimes it's just hard to keep going. It's hard to keep going. You know what happens? We just go through difficulties, and it's hard to remember our why or our it. Even if we're doing what we love, if we're doing something that makes us excited, sometimes we get run down, we get bummed out. And that's why we have Jane Bishop on from time to time to remind us about why we're doing what we do and what our it is. Jane Bishop invests in people. She believes each person deserves to go for their it. And recognizing that it can change at different points in life and in business. And Jane works with people to sync up with their inner core so they can achieve their desired outcome. She's a credentialed professional business and life coach. She's a published author, workshop trainer, and specializes in using the DISC behavior and emotional intelligence assessments. And as one client recently stated, quote, Jane has that uncanny ability to cut to the chase without showing the knife. If you're planning to move on strongly, this is a woman who makes that manageable and sustainable. Jane, welcome back to the show. How are you this evening?
Oh, thank you, Kristin. I am awesome, and it's always so much fun to be on the show with you and Judy when she's there. But we'll say hello to her in her absence. How are you this evening?
I'm wonderful. And, you know, you're just like, Jane, I have to tell you, every time I talk to you, and we've had you on the show a few times, I just can't say enough. You're like a warm slice of apple pie. You're like comfort food for the busy lady. And you're so much more than that. I just want to get into that because you really help people to get into what's really deeply going on inside of them. And I appreciate you so much for that.
Oh, thank you, Kristin. I just have to ask, though, the warm slice of apple pie, does it have ice cream on the side, too, a la mode? Now, that makes it really comfortable.
It would be a crime if it didn't, Jane.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Jane, you talk about our it. What
Yes.
is a person's it, and how do they know when they have an it?
That is a great question, Kristin. It really is something that a person is very interested in. I use the word passionate about a passion a lot. Some people use other words with that, but it's something that makes you get up each morning. It's something that you can spend a lot of time involved in and not be zapped. In other words, it does not de-energize you, it energizes you. And it varies from person to person, as well as it changes sometimes at different life points. A person may have an it in their 20s that they really go for and they achieve, and then as they gain more experience and more education in life, it may morph a little bit into something else. But I can tell you almost without fail, even when it morphs, it's building on the prior it, to use that, that terminology.
I like that you talk about evolution because I think some people, especially when they get out of college and they're trying to find their way and they're trying to find their vocation, don't necessarily see past that first it. So I'm glad that you brought up that its can evolve and it can build. I think that's important because if you don't build your it, I think sometimes, or you allow it to evolve, you don't necessarily evolve as a person the way you think you should or as you're capable of evolving.
I agree with you, Kristin, and you said two key phrases. You said as you evolve as you think you should, or as you keep evolving. And sometimes, not to fast forward and jump into how not to quit, but sometimes our own expectations of measuring ourselves against somebody else can be a hindrance to continuing to pursue our it. And it can be, if you think of a storyline, it can be the villain in somebody's story and actually moving them to the sideline and really telling them, oh, you got to give up, you can't do that, you can't do that. All of that self-limiting talk that we do.
I think you and I are discovering something interesting here, Jane, because one of the things that I know I struggle with personally and always have is people get into rivalries. They get into competitive mode. Our business culture rewards that. And that doesn't, and if you focus so much on a competition or making a certain benchmark before you're really prepared to, it can drive you kind of crazy, I would think, because you're not allowing your own growth and your own stretching. You're trying to keep up with this rat race and projecting your fears and your anxieties and your baggage on other people out there who are doing better than me. And Go ahead, Jane. I'm sorry.
You hit the nail on the head. You took a breath, and I thought you had paused. My apologies.
It's okay.
The doing better than me, that is so key in so many people's lives. And at the very core of that is our human nature is we want to be part of a community. We want to connect. And often we get so absorbed and focused on that we lose sight of who we are.
It was interesting. I was having a discussion with someone over dinner the other day, and they were frustrated. They, it's kind of the day-to-day banal sort of tensions at work and dealing with people. And I said, people are comparative thinkers and they're also associative thinkers. They compare themselves to others, and they also associate. If you had a bad experience, say a dog bit you, you may associate a dog with pain, not necessarily a pet. People tend to associate things together, and then they get trapped in these ruts of thinking that they cannot necessarily break out of. Now, I want to talk about some other things with you, too, because I know a lot of people, we're all trying to do our best. There are very few people that I think walk through life and say, I'm just going to give 20% and see what I get. Most of the people are like, I'm going to give 100%, I'm going to give 110%, I'm going to be the best that I can be. And I know a lot of people spend a lot of time and a lot of effort trying to pursue something, and maybe it's not working for them, and they want to quit. What's your advice to them?
Well, obviously, as you know, me, Kristin, it depends on the person, but generally speaking, there are some core essentials, and my response to them would be, first of all, to ask them a question. Why did they start pursuing that in the first place? So I would really try to get them back to their why. Mm-hmm. And is that why still valid? If it is no longer valid for whatever reason in their life, then we kind of peel back the onion, to use that image a little bit more, and think about, all right, well then if that's no longer valid for you, what is your catalyst? What is your motivation for continuing to pursue that? It could be that because they're trying to measure up. It could be that expectation factor. It could be a variety of things. Once we kind of discover that and reveal that, so then the third area that I would kind of take them to, or a third step of advice, to use your words, would be to simply ask the question, well, what's keeping you from changing directions?
Right.
If their why is no longer valid and they're only pursuing it because they think that's what's expected of them, then what's keeping you from changing? And most of the time, one of the underlying roots of that, male or female, is a confidence issue. So then you start looking for ways, okay, identify the core of who you are. How do you sync up with your core? And then how do you embrace that? Because that's where your confidence will come from. Being yourself and using your gifts and skills.
I think you highlighted upon many things, and I know that a lot of people, in my experience, tend to create a life around what they think. There are different kinds of expectations, but around what they think their parents would want for them or what their culture would want for them. And then, they plug along, and then all of a sudden it kind of drops out from underneath them. And I think some people, because we have such a stigma against quitting, don't be a quitter,
Right.
There's a lot of shame against that. I think a lot of people don't really recognize a difference between quitting and letting go of something that no longer serves them. What do you think about that?
That is an excellent observation, Kristin. I read a quote years ago, so I don't know who said it. And the quote was this: "It's always too soon to quit." Mm-hmm. And for me, that means you've got to have some determination. You've got to have some grit. Not many people have grit anymore. That may be another whole subject. However, just as you said, when you realize that something has cycled to an end and it becomes a necessary ending, then it's not quitting, it's releasing it. It's acknowledging it. That this is no longer valid. I'm going to put an end to this. I'm going to celebrate that, because then there's a book titled Necessary Endings, which I highly recommend. When we end something, we are creating space to say yes to something else. So there's a big difference between quitting and bringing closure.
I think what you're highlighting is so true. And I think one of the things that we miss out, especially, you talked about grit, and I do want to visit that some more because it is an interesting topic. One of the things that I think we miss out on, in particular in this culture, because we're disconnected. You know, our ancestors were farmers. They were connected with the land. They were connected to the natural cycles of the land. You know, they knew all things grew. They knew all things died. And they lived off the land. I think because of modernity and post-modernity, people are not necessarily attached to the natural cycles of being anymore. And it creates a sort of a cognitive dissonance in the human psyche that people just think things have to last forever or that they can be perpetuated. And especially, and to take a little bit of a deeper dive here, you know, I think that was part of Andy Warhol's work with creating the lithographs of, you know, something fades with repetition. I think that was what he was pointing at in some of his artwork, is the more copies you create of something doesn't necessarily hold the same integrity. I took a way big left turn there because that's who I am, Jane, and you know that. But
and I went right with you, Kristin. I'm not sure what that says, but
it says that we're swinging left. We're taking a big left ontological discussion here. But I mean, I think there's some merit in that we need to really get back into our cycles. And women are cyclical as well. I mean, we literally have cycles of being. We have a menstrual cycle. We have cycles of our lives that are just not necessarily acknowledged and talked about the way they should be.
Well, I'm going to kind of maybe toggle back and forth between the left and another curve. But you were mentioning with the Andy Warhol that, you know, with repetition it fades. Think about what we do to ourselves with these cycles, as you say it. Everybody has cycles, but we as women, our cycles. Think about all the stories that we tell ourselves.
Right.
And our brains are wired to think cause and effect. So therefore, our brains are wired for stories. And quite frankly, the better the story, the better our brain works. You see that in the movie industry.
Right.
You know, the aspects of a story. But if we're telling ourselves the wrong story or the incorrect story or the self-sabotaging stories, then that's where the repetition with our storytelling within ourselves comes. And what begins to happen is our true self then begins to fade. And we become unrecognizable to ourselves and unrecognizable to those that are around us. Now, where do you want to go with that curveball?
Well, here's where I want to go with this, Jane, because I think you and I are stepping into some interesting territory here, and that's why I love you. Is, you know, it's interesting because I think what reinforces that, you talk about the movie business and you talk about the stories we tell each other and we tell ourselves about our own experience, is the best stories have a strong emotional component. And I think that's one of the things that people really get frozen in is the emotions of quitting. And they either can't handle the emotional release or the emotional release of letting go. And how do you think the emotions contribute to that? Because I know that the stories that we tell each other and tell ourselves really strike emotions in people and keep us stuck.
Oh, they do. More often than we like to admit sometimes. But because we are emotional in beings, our emotions guide us. Where we have to recognize our emotions and the impact, emotions are there to inform us. And what we like to do sometimes is we don't use the emotions as information. We try to label them positive or negative rather than keep them neutral and look at the data that our emotions are giving us. And then they get stuck in that amygdala part of our brain. And they just kind of wallow there and sit there. And as long as they're there, we cannot make a logical, rational decision. And sometimes we let them sit there because it's comfortable. It's the fact that it takes too much effort to get out of it. we allow our emotions to control us to the point that we can't think clearly. And, I mean, we all love good stories, movies, books, hear other people tell stories, and yes, that taps into that emotion. What do we do with that emotion? That's where we get caught, and that's where when people get stuck there, they tend to sometimes want to quit, give up, and not continue on their forward path.
And push that negative thing away instead of trying to, and leave it in there. And I think what you're talking about is that sometimes as people living in a complex and modern world that's so fast-paced and has so many demands, that we don't necessarily have enough curiosity about our own emotions. We just want them to go away or to be more contained.
We live in a very fast-paced culture. You know that probably far better than I, or at least differently, than I do, but very fast-paced. We live where we want things immediately. We have very little patience, and we don't spend the time to allow ourselves to process what's going on inside of us so that we can make a sustainable shift and it doesn't keep us stuck.
I like that, a sustainable shift, because I think you can't, when you're making big life decisions about whether to stay, whether it's at a job, whether it's a career path, whether it's a relationship, there's going to be some kind of catharsis, even if it's the small things about the terrible job that you liked, but you need to go, or the safety of that job, or the safety of a relationship. I like that idea of a sustainable shift, because people really get unnerved by, I would say, the future. There's also a fear of the future and a fear of the unknown as well there when you're dealing with these decisions of what path to go in, when you know that you have to make a change. And I think some people are forced into making changes. If you're just stuck, Jane, like you're just doggedly resisting a necessary change, I think that leads to burnout in so many people. Do you see a lot of people suffering from burnout with the people that you coach and that you work with?
I do. I really do. And it's interesting, there's multiple reasons that it leads to that. But there again, I want to come to a root cause. It's like you were talking about before we went on air about the trees, last week, kind of doing their little yoga poses because they were blowing in such weird directions. But there's a root to every tree that keeps it held in place. And the root cause sometimes is that people put everything aside. They get out of sync with who they are. And it's just like when we have our Bluetooth devices, if we are out of range with the device, we are not going to sync up our Bluetooth with that device. And when we allow ourselves, for whatever multitude of reasons, stray from the core of who we are, we get out of sync. And we burn out. We give up. We become ineffective. We can't be people of influence because we have nothing to give.
Right, and we can't hold that strong center either.
No.
That gives us boundaries and gives us an anchor. I'm so glad you brought that up, Jane. And I know that you discuss all of these type of issues with people and people in business. How can working with a business coach help you not quit? If someone's really on the verge of making that decision, how can you help them out?
Well, it can give the person support. I give them support. I provide accountability as a coach, and I also give them kind of like a safety valve for them to gain some clarity. I've got a client right now. She's been in business for several years, but she was stuck. And she acknowledged 2 or 3 sessions into our working together, she's at point B and she wants to already be at point Z. Well, you can jump there, but you're not going to stay there. So she's now just beginning to have enough clarity and understanding to work the process, to really focus on those small things, as you mentioned, so that things are clearer and it will be a sustainable shift. And I help them think through that. I help them have confidence that they are on the right path when they recognize that. And I'm also a cheerleader. We
Yes,
work hard, but we're going to have fun.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you've never met Jane in person, she's absolutely, she's making light of her cheerleaderness, but you feel it when you sit down with Jane and you talk to her. She has such a pleasant and lovely energy. When I met you at the conference, I was just so excited to be around you and just chat, because I always felt better after I chatted with you a little bit. And it is true. And sometimes we do need a cheerleader. We need someone to help us make that big jump or help us to bend or stretch in a new area. And you can definitely help people with that, Jane. Jane, I always say, and Judy and I always say, we always need more time. We need like an after show. Bill Maher has one. Why can't I have one?
Why can't you have an after show,
We're working on it.
Okay.
We're working on it. So, Jane, I know that people are going to be interested in more of what you have to say. And, folks, we have some episodes of Jane up on our YouTube channel already, but I know they're going to want to connect with you online on social media and your website. How do they find you on Facebook and Twitter, and what's your website, Jane?
Okay, website, janebishop.live. Real simple. Facebook, Jane Bishop. Or my business page is Take the Next Step CCT. Twitter, Jane Bishop. LinkedIn, Jane Bishop. So you can find me a multitude of platforms, and I would love to have conversations with anybody that they think that, my resources can help them not quit going for their it.
And, of course, Atlanta is blessed to have you. And, Jane, thank you. I'm truthful as well. So, Jane, thank you so much for being on the show. It's always a pleasure. And thank you for taking those big left turns with me today. I really appreciate it.
Kristin, it's my honor. Always good to be on the show with you. And thank you very much. And you just keep going for your it.
Oh, thank you, Jane. Thank you so much. You have a great night.
Thanks, you too.
Well, that was Jane Bishop, ladies and gentlemen. You can see why I'm a big fan. And another thing that I want to talk about, we talked about not quitting. We talked about having resolve. We talked about making sustainable shifts. And one thing that is happening in our world today is that the dialogue about sexual assault, sexual harassment is going through a sustainable shift. And one thing as women we cannot quit doing is advocating for those who've been sexually assaulted. April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And by the time our 50 minutes on air is over this evening, 30 people in our country will have been sexually assaulted. Every 98 seconds, someone in the U.S. is sexually assaulted. As of 1998, an estimated 17.7 million American women have been the victims of rape or attempted rape. Our show is called What Women Want, and I can say, quite frankly, what women want is the violence against women to stop. And on that note, I'm very honored today to have two women who are sharing their stories of overcoming sexual assault, authors Veronica Loving and Jazzmine Jackson. These two women are using their new stage play, Feeding a Monster, to help victims and survivors affected by sexual assault start the road to physical healing. The play is a genius blend of comedy, tragedy, and the lessons they learned along the way. The play, written by Loving, Ladarian Williams, and directed by actor Art Evans, who's best known for the movie Die Hard 2. The play is based on Loving and Jackson's memoir, Feeding a Monster. This memoir details Loving's 21-year marriage to her husband, who was a minor league baseball player. Their marriage took a turn when Loving learned that the man Her husband, father, and athlete she loved was a sexual assault predator living in her own home. The play is scheduled to finish its last run April 27th through April 29th at the Hudson Theater here in Los Angeles. Welcome to the show, Veronica and Jazzmine.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
I'm so glad that you're here today because I think this is one of the biggest issues of our time.
I agree.
And I really am excited to have you because you have a unique experience. I think it's one thing to hear the sobering statistics and to be sad about them. It's another thing to really talk about the issues that are really plaguing women across age group, across color, across creed.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so glad you're here to really talk about what you experienced because I think it's so powerful.
Thank you.
Now, Veronica, what you lived through, I think, is every woman's worst nightmare.
Yeah.
Your husband, Jazzmine's father.
That's her stepfather.
Her stepfather.
Mm-hmm.
He was a predator, and he preyed upon her, your daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Would you share with us what happened?
So he actually raped her, but I didn't find out. And well, she told me, but I didn't expect that. It wasn't like he had symptoms or any red flags that I would have seen.
Mm-hmm.
And then we found out that, during the trial, that this was a habit that he had. So he had done it to multiple women. And he would do like date rape.
Jeez.
To multiple women throughout his lifetime. So the entire time that I knew him. But I had no idea.
That's awful. I mean, that must have felt like the most giant betrayal because he was her stepfather. He was there in her life every single day.
Yeah, since she was born. When I came from the hospital, he and I were friends, and then we dated soon after that. So he was there from the beginning.
Jazzmine, I mean, I can imagine this situation was awful on so many levels. Did you tell your mother immediately what happened to you?
Immediately, no. I wasn't living at home anymore. I was 21 when it happened, so I told her the next day. But I had to be prompted because I felt like, as a sexual assault victim, what I've learned over the years is that I'm not the only one who felt that guilt, that shame, the embarrassment, or taking ownership over something that wasn't mine, So it was hard for me to figure out like how I could burden her with that news, like, hey, your husband's kind of crazy. It was hard for me to drop that bomb on her. So I had to be prompted to do that.
I think what you're talking about is something that there's this sort of emotional maze that I think people have to really navigate when something like this happens, especially if it's someone that you consider family.
Correct.
And it's one of the most underreported crimes.
Absolutely.
Is sexual violence within a family, whether that's a biological family or a family that's come together as the result of, two divorcees coming together.
Yeah.
It's a seriously underreported crime.
100%, yeah.
Now, Veronica, in the book, Feeding a Monster, you revealed that you had also been victimized in the past. So when Jazzmine comes to you hurt, what went on inside of you seeing this?
Well, I think instantly I felt that I failed because me being molested at 3 years old, obviously my parents didn't know, but you carry that with you. So that changes the trajectory of who you are. So one of the things that I used to do was make sure that my kids were protected, and I absolutely, checked him out, paid attention, and then for it to happen right under my nose was just shocking. And I was thinking, how could this be? I'm aware, I've watched, I didn't let him sit on anybody's laps, I did all the right things, and it still happened. But what I know now, of the laws of universal law, pretty much anything you think about, you bring about. Now, that doesn't make it my problem that I did it. But when you have fear, you bring that fear upon yourself. Does that make sense?
It does make sense because sometimes you're trying to push something away so hard.
Yes.
That you end up having so much mental focus on what I don't want.
Right.
That it comes staring at you right in the face.
Right.
Absolutely.
And
so the main thing is to focus on what you want, not what you don't want. And that's one of the things and the lessons that I learned from this.
So this happens, and what was your next step?
Well, immediately, I just got off the plane. I was working up north. She told me I was in shock. Like, when you think about it and somebody else says, you say what you would have done. I would have done this. I would have done that.
Right.
And I hear that a lot. But honestly, for the first time in my life, I had no words, like zero. I just kept saying, like, wow. But I did the right things. My body took us to the police station, but my mind was frozen. So I called for help. I called a friend down to, like, help me just talk, because I couldn't even speak. But I'm happy that I did still, even though it was robotic, do the right thing.
Can I ask you, was it almost akin to, like, someone dying suddenly, in a way, that shock?
I think it was worse, actually.
Really?
Because I haven't had, like, a child or a parent die, so I can't say, but I have had someone close to me die. It was horrific. And that seems like God. You can kind of justify it and say,
right.
God took them and they're in a better place.
It was completely out of my control.
Yes.
There was nothing I could have done.
Right. And this was more like, I am her mother.
How did I miss
this? I am
this?
the protector. I brought this person into our lives. And it was just like a bomb that just went off in our entire family, because we have other children as well together.
Right.
So it was like trying to navigate all that.
And he had a child on his own, right? That he brought into the marriage. And then you brought Jazzmine into the marriage.
Yes.
And then how many children did you have together?
We adopted one and we had 2. So we had 5 of them. Yeah.
So all of a sudden, I'm sure you're just like in hyper vigilant mode. How deep is this problem?
Yeah. Well, you know what? I think for me, it processed slower than that, because I don't think I could handle it all at one time.
Right.
Like, I had no idea that it was more than this. So the first few days, it was just Jazzmine. And then things started to come out, but I think it just kind of took its time, thank God, because I don't think I could have handled the magnitude of what the real deal was at one time.
Was it kind of like opening Pandora's box?
Yes.
Oh, Lord.
Yes.
Because there's like, okay, well, I hope that it's just this one contained incident or this one contained situation, and then you just keep opening this.
Yeah. Because I think with my personality and the things that I was doing, I was so busy fixing other people. I spent a lot of time fixing him on other things that I was deflecting. I wasn't paying attention to my needs. So when he did this, my first mode of thought was, he must be sick. He must be, his brain must have snapped. I had all of these things. They have to have
How can I fix
therapy.
him?
Right. Even though I knew that was illogical, at least I knew that's how I was feeling. Like, you're a wife. Okay, now your husband is super sick. No, you won't take him back, but he needs therapy. We have to find this special therapist that I knew didn't exist, but I was thinking they must exist. You were crazy, really.
Right. You were trying to go back to that better feeling.
Yes.
But thank goodness there was a part of your brain that realized that could not be anymore.
Right.
Now, after the assault took place, what was the most difficult thing that you had to deal with?
Oh my God. It was so much at one time that I actually wished I was dead, even though I knew I couldn't die, because I didn't have time to die, because I had to take care of my kids. If that
right,
makes
who
sense.
would take care of your kids?
Right. So, but I did. It seemed like it'd be easier to be dead at that time, honestly, and financially I was slaughtered. I still had to work, and I was on a 7-day-a-week crazy assignment that I was trying to get us out of debt. Each one of my kids were having panic attacks and falling apart at different times. Like Tuesday, it was one. Wednesday, the other one was okay. And the other one, I was like just putting kickstands under all of them. Family, we had judgment. We had like sneaky liars. We didn't know who to trust. Not my personal fammy, his family. And we didn't know who to trust, who not
and
to
he was
trust.
playing minor league ball, so the minute you actually stood up for yourself...
He left he had stopped playing ball a few years before that.
Okay.
But I feel like he was the hero of the family, of his family.
Right.
So yeah, they all turned
the
on us.
favorite son. So, they had to protect that.
Yes.
Jazzmine, what about you? I mean, you suffered. What was the most difficult thing for you to deal with in this tornado you found yourself in?
Just like my mom said, there was no one difficult thing. Honestly, the entire thing, me questioning my own sanity was extremely difficult. I developed PTSD, and I was having flashbacks and panic attacks, and I thought that was only for people in war. And then here I am barricading my door to go to bed. There were and I would feel attacked personally all the time by like small things, you know. So it was very hard to be in a family with several siblings, all going through their own personal traumas as well.
Right.
And then especially for his family to reject us and you know, not believe me or say that we could handle it within the family without the police. I was like, whoa.
Not even attempt to hold him accountable.
Right. So those were all very difficult for me in the beginning, you know, when it first happened.
Was there, when you were dealing with all of that, the PTSD, the depression, dealing with your siblings, was there any, what was sustaining you in that moment? In those moments, I mean, there was more than one, obviously, but what was keeping you here with us?
Yeah. Well, if I can be completely frank, I had several vices. One was like all the training that I had of my spiritual teachings. Like I didn't know that I was using them. They were just like popping up, you know. But I would feel myself get overwhelmed in a lot of ways and dove into my addiction. So I would drink more, you know, I would use substances, and I didn't realize that like I was self-medicating because I didn't know whether I could trust God anymore, you know, in that moment after such a betrayal, you know. So I had all this self-doubt, all this doubt of God, all this doubt of my family, all this doubt of everyone. So it was hard to stay afloat. It was hard to quit. I mean, not to quit, you know.
And if you don't mind me asking, what's your spiritual faith? Are you?
It's called New Thought, Ancient Wisdom. I don't know if you ever heard of Agape or.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I think what's the reason I ask is because I think when you have a father figure in your life who betrays you in the way that you had been betrayed, because especially in Judeo-Christian culture, we have this strong emphasis on God as Father God, the God of, you know, He is the great Father, the Father of us all, and many cultures have that ideation of God. And when men who represent your father or father figures to you in your life injure you, damage you, betray you, violate you in that way, it can really shake your faith.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'm glad that you've found some healing moving forward with your life and with being so frank about what you went through.
Thank you.
Now you went to trial.
Yes.
That must have been bad. I don't mean to make light of it. I don't know how to say it in any way poignant.
No,
and
you know what? Honestly, we do need to make light of.
Right.
We make fun of ourselves and the times we went through it and the things just because you got to get through. And in our family, we use a lot of humor, and you know that can offend people, but it helps us, so it's fine. But the trial was a year or so after, 2 years after. I had, you know, Jazzmine had been going through it, and she took the majority of my time.
Right.
And, you know, but my other kids were struggling too, so it was just it was a really hard place to be. The trial was almost like, whew, at least this will be over.
Right.
But it didn't work out like that. And then he got acquitted, which was...
And you had DNA evidence.
Oh, yeah, we had DNA. We had...
he admitted guilt at one point.
He said I didn't rape her on purpose.
On purpose, because
you
have to be a purposeful rapist.
Yes.
Right.
Is that not sick? That's when I made
my
the decision.
spine is like curling right now.
They played it in the courtroom. I did not rape her on purpose. That's when we were like, oh. So when the sheriffs came in, I was shaking because I thought this man that I've known for the last 20 years, he's going to prison. Even that's sad, but he needs to go.
Right.
You know,
because he's a threat to other people.
Yes. And then when they said he was acquitted, I was like, now the fear shifted on us. Like, what are we going to do? We got to get out of here. You know, like, oh my God.
Right, because there might be whenever you're dealing with a situation where a person is imbalanced, unhinged.
Yes.
You don't know what you're going to get.
That's
Absolutely.
how I felt from moment one.
Right.
I felt like, okay, now I knew what I was dealing with before. I mean, I still thought he was a little crazy prior. But when it happened, I was like, oh, no. Like, we should all run.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I thought initially. And then it's like, I couldn't allow that power over the situation, because it's like, if I chose the opposite way. I was like more brazen, more out of control and wild, and like in people's faces, especially, you know, almost calling forth something to happen because I felt, I don't know whether I felt like I deserved it or whether I felt like, you know, it was due to happen anyway. It was kind of like a...
It was kind of like you don't care, just throw it in.
Well, I think when somebody's predatory nature just is bald face right in front of you, and you feel that you've been preyed upon, it affects you deeply.
Yeah.
And you can't ignore it anymore, and that fight or flight instinct kicks in.
Yeah.
Now, he got acquitted. You rebuilt your lives. Now you talked about your siblings earlier, Jazzmine.
Yeah.
How did this impact your relationship with your siblings? Because this happened to you. Some of them, he's their dad too.
Yeah.
What did you deal with there? How did that go?
That's been an up and down. That's a roller coaster. Over the years, it's been a lot. It's shown a lot of different ways. They were in high school, his kids, when this happened, so they were still young. They were still daddy's girls, and it was a development. They didn't know whether to believe me. I didn't know how I could prove it. You know, I also felt like I wasn't the best. I remember in my youth, I didn't want to be a role model. Like I was afraid to be a role model. So I felt like, oh, okay, now, of course they believe him over me, and they didn't, but they would go back and forth as to like, was it possible, you know? And that offended me. Everything offended me,
right?
You know, though. So it wasn't hard to offend me back then. But my relationship with them is strong now. But back then, I mean, it took a while. This is now what, 9-10 years.
And they were teenagers when this happened,
right?
Yeah.
So they were. I mean, and not to trivialize, but there was teenage angst there too.
Exactly.
I want to shift to the play. Now, you wrote the memoir first, Feeding a Monster. It has great reviews on Amazon. I read a little bit of the sample. It's a wonderful book.
It seemed like you read the book. I'm like, you were in it.
I read the sample. I do my homework. And folks, check out the book as well. Now, you adapted this book for the stage.
Yes.
What did you change?
Wow. Okay, so I came up with a treatment of how I wanted to, because in the book there are a lot of characters. I go back when I was younger. You know, I go back to when I was 3 and all the way up, because I kind of take ownership for who I am and how I attracted this man. So when you have such a small time, you have to try to figure it out. So some of the lines, it was just very intricate of how you write it so that you can bring things in without telling a whole story.
Right.
So we changed a couple of the characters. We dropped it down to 5 characters, is it? 5. And one of the characters is a combination of a lot of my friends and my family. Just that one character. And then there's a character that kind of is Jazz's boyfriend in the play, and he's a combination of some of her friends.
And support system. Yeah.
And support system. So that's how we worked it out. And it seems to have worked.
I so wish we had another hour. I'm looking at the clock going, oh no. Folks, if you're in the LA area, it's playing right now at the Hudson. Where can we get tickets?
You can get tickets on plays411.com/monster, or you can go to Hudson Theater and find them as well. This Friday for Denim Day, we're doing half off.
A Denim Day, ladies and gentlemen, just in case you're not aware, today is Denim Day. It is a day to recognize victims of sexual assault. There was a case in Europe where the person perpetrating the assault was acquitted because the female victim was wearing tight jeans. Literally, that is why we wear denim on this day, because apparently in their minds, that court's minds, the victim brought it upon herself because of what she was wearing, which is just heartbreaking and BS.
Correct.
So please, everybody, check out Feeding a Monster. Check out the memoir. If you're in LA this week, check out the play at the Hudson Theater. How do we keep up with you two after the play and stuff?
So you can reach me on Instagram at I am Veronica Loving, Facebook I am Veronica Loving or Veronica Loving, and Twitter Loving Veronica 1.
And me, my Instagram is I am Jazzmine Jackson. And my Facebook is under my name as well, Jazzmine Jackson. My name is spelled Jazzmine.
And we are so glad it's spelled Jazzmine. I saw that and I went, I like that.
I did that.
Ladies, I want to thank you both. It takes a lot to
having us.
share your story, especially when it's so personal.
Yeah.
And it's very brave of you to have written the book. It's brave of you to put it in a play. It's brave of you to sit with me today and share that part of your life. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank you on behalf of everybody who's experiencing this. You know, like I said, there's 30 more people that have just been sexually assaulted in the time we've sat down here, which is awful.
Yeah.
Right.
So thank you
That's why
so
we're
much.
here. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
So next week, everyone, we're going to have another great and compelling conversation. Keep tabs with us on Facebook, Twitter, and our website, whatwomenwantradio.com. Subscribe to us on YouTube, where you can catch all our great replays of all our great shows, including this one. It will be up pretty soon. And find us on latalkradio.com, and have a wonderful night.
Bro.
You're listening to What Women Want with Judy Goss and Kristin West, only on LA Talk Radio.